Hey everybody. Thanks for joining me on my walk. A little exercise. It's much hotter in this place than it ordinarily is. By far. By like 20 degrees. Now, that's a normative statement, right? I'm saying, well, there's a generality here. Yeah, well, the specific is what matters, because that's what we actually encounter. But it's hard not to notice, for me, change, transformation. The movement from a relatively predictable manifold of situations, or at least a context in which we're inclined to delude ourselves into thinking we know generally and maybe somewhat specifically what's going on. Or even what's wrong. What is unwrecked? What isn't right? What isn't correct? So one of the things I've noticed as a denizen of Golden Gate Park is that many of the fir trees over the past few years have been severely sunburned. And these are trees maybe 30 to 50 years old. The arborists say they've never seen anything like it in their time. And some of them have been around a while. These trees are vulnerable. And all of life is vulnerable. But changes in our relationship with the sun, these are fundamental changes for life on Earth. If something in the sun changes that is accessible to living beings, and I'm going to go on the dangerous side of accessible and presume that most of the changes that happen in the sun are expressed in some way terrestrially, in the earth, in the living beings. A change in relation with the sun is not the kind of change that humans are very good at understanding. They've long ago departed a mystical relationship with origin, which doesn't mean insane narratives, by the way. It just means sensitivity in the way that I'm using it. It just means sensitivity to the unnameable. All that is never captured or very rarely approached by our representational habits and frameworks and thoughts. And trust me when I hope you'll realize the grave sincerity in my voice when I say the representational frameworks that were handed down to us are severely damaged. They're missing vast portions of what I'll refer to as maps. In such a way that absence is profoundly blinding to our thought. By accepting the frameworks we've inherited, the vast majority of us have not merely lost, but are continuing to lose catastrophically libraries upon libraries of domains in which we can develop, have experience, have meaningful roles and lives together with the world, with nature. Intelligence, most of intelligence as we should authentically conceive of it, is prohibited by the frameworks we're used to using. And there's all kinds of reasons, there's all kinds of descriptions of how this happened and why this happens. I think they'd be too tedious to explore at length, so I'll skip over them. But what I'm trying to say is it's not inexplicable. It's relatively easy to frame an explanation of where the damage came from, how we took the damage, how we accelerate the damage together most of the time, anytime we speak or write, when we use language, we're expanding the damage. And we have the same problem, you can see it very clearly with technology. We keep inventing new frameworks, we being Homo sapiens, the species on Earth. We keep inventing and deploying lethally self-terminating frameworks in nature against our own origin. And with 7.6 billion of us, we can really accelerate that process in a way otherwise difficult to conceive of. And we are, if we as Homo sapiens in general. And of course, again, it's not so much the individuals, though we all have roles. It's the institutions, the corporations, the collectives are disembodied. They essentially play like demons. And since they don't have bodies, they can't lose bodies, they can't die, they don't have minds, they don't have senses, they sense markets and respond, the humans inside the, just so that it doesn't sound like I'm talking about a homunculus, the humans inside the institutions and corporations and governments and so on, they're all playing out roles partly determined traditionally and historically, partly determined linguistically. And those roles incline them to prosper if they defect from authentic human relation. So all of these institutions are basically sort of carrots inviting people to defect. And the ones who don't defect will lose the competition, because the ones who do gain degrees of liberty in what we can clumsily call competition. It's actually something weirder than that, I think. So this is where we find ourselves circa 2020, but it's not new. It's just been recently doubled down and tripled down, and maybe even exponentially redowned on. It's like 95 degrees in my neighborhood, where it, for 2 decades, very rarely rose above 68. I don't know if it's wrong, but it's different. One of the things on my mind was to talk somewhat humorously about what's wrong by saying, well, there isn't a second list. And somebody might say, well, what do you mean? And I mean, there's nothing on the other list. The list of what isn't wrong. At least for humans right now, in our representational behavior, thought, and activity, there's nothing really that isn't wrong. So if we want to ask what's wrong, the answer is simpler than any of us might expect. There's nothing that isn't wrong right now. Now, I'm half joking, of course. And I'm speaking of a limited contextual scope. Us humans, what we do, how we relate with nature, language, each other, ourselves. Taken as a whole, it's mostly wrong. Take any individual, there's going to be mostly wrongness going on right now. It's really funny that there's an actual correct time, which is right now. The right now. The good now. That's something we've mostly been absent from. Though many of us strive to live authentic and sincere and considerate and compassionate and intelligent and creative lives. And I'm not raining on that parade at all. I'm saying that wherever that itself might be going well, the context is collapsing. The skyscrapers of layered fictions that our humanity mostly orbits and serves is pretty much all wrong. And the more representational it is, the more wrong it is. Right now. And I'm using that word to mean methods and prostheses which we employ to defect from meaningful relation with ourselves, with each other, with the world, with the sun, with knowledge, with language, with the possibility of human intelligence. So when we defect from that, we get representations, and some of them seem very noble. It's not like they all look bad, right? It's more that there's an inherent danger in that ploy that's too easily overlooked. And I know this somehow relates to the formation and transformation of what we often refer to as our psyche, because that's part of where that ongoing battle between origin and representation is happening in us individually, and at least analogously in groups, cohorts, populations, nations. If you hear the music in the language, which is something I try to remain aware of, I practice it, you'll notice that words like constitution, intrusion, attention, corporation, institution, representation, relation, they all have either the I-O-N ending, or many of them have the T-I-O-N, or even A-T-I-O-N, ation, nation, reparation, salvation, appropriation. This phonemic fragment has profound meaning that's very difficult to see if one has only spoken English or has never been engaged with an alphabet where the letters have meanings. And there's so many different ways to break this down. But if I were breaking it down for a child, I might say the sound, though variously inflected for different purposes in different words, it represents where we come together at the tree. At the tree of origin, at the tree of union, of heart and life, and hope, and prodigy, but also at the tree of death, malignancy, disembodied frameworks propagating in waves of staggering, self-accelerating omnicide. Communication. These words have a magic inside them that the English speakers will likely never see, and it's the kind of magic that would easily collapse into a religion, unfortunately. It's very ancient. It goes far, far back before the origins of English or its progenitors. It's old evidence of the minds of our distant ancestors and progenitors. A tree, A-T. I, a self, one who sees. O, the great unity that is origin. N, new transformations. When we come together, things change. If we come together falsely, for purposes that are ignoble, malign, deceptive, competitive in the wrong way, then we're gathering at the dark tree, the tree of death, the tree where minds collapse, where societies collapse, self-terminating games. Though they don't terminate immediately, they terminate in near-term futures. And sometimes they terminate immediately. When we come together instead with authenticity, our essence, the noble virtues that comprise what I think of as the foundation of our nature as beings, and compasses, right? Things that help us navigate where thoughts and ideas are insufficient to guide us well. Our hearts, our dreaming, our visions, the noble and beautiful innate nature of human beings prior to being dipped in the bronze of representational language and cultures. The good stuff. When we come together around that, the tree we meet at becomes a portal to astonishing recollection, reunion, communion, participation, consciousness, intelligence, wonder, awe, reverence. And this, I think, is what, or I imagine, is what the deepest aches within us ache toward. In the old garden in Genesis, there were two trees The one that got us in trouble is referred to as the tree of knowledge, but the actual language in Hebrew, and anyone can correct me if I've got this wrong, it implies death. The name of the tree implies death. And the other tree, the tree of life, an angel set to guard it, lest by our access to it, we become gods when we are not prepared for that role. Now, of course, we've become gods. We are the knowledge gods. We are the making gods. We are the techni gods, we think. But we're acting more like an infant having a tantrum with an atomic bomb trigger in its hand. I want to tear down every living thing and make it into an object. And if I can't do that, all game's end, I'll kill everybody, everything. Infinite hunger without satiation, without satiety, is the gift of the tree of knowledge when divorced from the tree of communion, life. And the angel that guards that tree is very interesting. It spins a sword in every direction at once. That makes a sphere. When the sun changes, everything changes. We're doing intelligence wrong. We're doing language wrong. We're doing being together falsely. We're doing being of nature wrong. Our efforts to solve problems create 12 others in the future. Our institutions are primed to defect from ethics, nobility, integrity, purpose, because their origins and histories are both malignant and fake. Calling that out is not going to help us much. And when one sees that something's wrong, we sort of feel a duty. Hey, that package over there lying around for 4 hours looks kind of suspicious. Is it safe? By the way, that particular threat isn't one that was muchly popular before a certain series of events in the past couple decades. But yeah, if we see something wrong, like that there's smoke coming out of the window, right, we tell someone. And in some cases we get involved directly, rather than summoning authorities who are supposedly vested with the skill, equipment, and understanding to deal with the issue. Doctors and such, lawyers and things. Lawyers are a particularly interesting symptom of huge problems with our frameworks. So yeah, we point it out, right? And we're living in this really bizarre moment where pointing out what's wrong is making things more wrong. Would I point out the house fire if I knew that the firemen were going to be bringing gasoline? Because that's how it is a lot these days. And in fact, the problem that we have with police is precisely this kind of problem, right? In the United States, in general. But we've got two different kinds of malignancy. We've got the responders are going to create problems. And we also have the collapse toward calling people out. While some of its purposes are not entirely off base, its tactics and outcomes suck. Bad. So there's this whole idea of like, call out the bad thing. And then try to prosecute the bad thing's originators. And I'm not claiming we should entirely depart that behavior, because we have to use it intelligently, right? If it's not used intelligently, it creates more problems of different kinds. And it's not equipped to solve those problems that it creates, this motivation, right? And you'll notice in a way that I'm employing a paradox here, because I'm going to call out calling out. Or actually, I'm going to call out the forms of calling out that get us worse problems while masquerading as heroic. But don't negatively affect the entire commons by imposing a kind of witch hunt. And that witch hunt is endless. I just want to be really clear. You start down that road, that's a hungry ghost. That thing will eat everything and never stop. Because it has to sustain itself once it's instanced, just like all the other competing human behavioral frames, ideological frames, philosophical frames, financial frames, political frames, religious frames. All these things are in competition. Mostly zero-sum competition, kill the enemy kind, with each other. And just in case it isn't obvious, those games are going to take up 74% of our processing power, right? Of our pool of potential that we can enact. They're going to just keep eating more and more and more of that until there's none available for us. Until our games overwhelm our being, overwhelm our bodies, overwhelm our relationships and minds, and overwhelm nature. And I don't think we're on the brink of this. I wish I could say we were, and hopefully I'm wrong. I think we've fallen off the cliff of this and are now accelerating toward the reunion with gravity at the bottom of that fall. So I want to suggest something slightly different, invitation. That we invite each other toward sincere, earnest authenticity, toward meaningful roles, toward the possibility of intelligence, toward clearly seeing through language and representations in a way that lifts us back to our original place far above them when they were toys, not gods. Invitation, calling in. Hey, come on over. Invitation. All these words, they have this old song. And that song is filled with 100 stories, 1,000 stories of living beings being beautiful together. Human beings, non-human beings, the ecologies, the living place beings, the sun, the moon, the morning star. All of the planets, all of the moons, the essence of time-space itself, alive in us. Remember? Remember? You see, you get this staggering benefit when you distinguish individual beings from a unity. And then they have local, unique, specific experience unique to all the ways in which they are unique, as beings, as consciousnesses, as humans, as animals, as dreamers, as thinkers, as those who speak and hear. When they have that unique experience distinctly and then they come back together into reunion, then an ancient celebration takes place. And from that celebration emerges gifts. The ancestral inheritance. Brought back to life in our direct experience, not our narratives, not our representations. In our souls. The souls in which the light of living eyes sings. The whole idea was reunion, not competition. And there's something competition-like in there, but the real stuff is noble. Its purposes are noble. Its outcomes are noble and beautiful and true, truthful, trustworthy. Most of us have to skip over the actual astonishing complexity of our human interiority, the inconceivable gifts that we're born with. We have to skip all that and play out roles that quickly collapse into habit, addiction, defection from ourselves, from origin, from nature, from relation, into representations. That's a grueling, miserable job. No one I can think of would knowingly accept that job, and it requires incredible quantities of work to sustain its misery, to sustain that defection, that running away from our own interiority, our essence, the meaning of our birth, not in words, in relationships. If we could make the space to do half that much work toward reunion in our own bodies, not merely in our, relationships with other people, but certainly there too, but no, just with ourselves, to reunite our dreaming mind with our waking mind, our heart with our intellect, our essence with the toys it can reject entirely or use in ways that are truthful, authentic, honorable. We have to select the tree on purpose every time we reunite with anything. We're back at that old choice. Relation or gratification. And I think many of us have forgotten or become numb to the sensations with which we tell the difference immediately. When our hearts and beings light up and feel electrically alive. When we set foot in the lake. or when I catch my friend just before she was to fall, and we're both okay, and we laugh. Mutuality is profoundly rewarding, and it's been getting evicted by an ever-accelerating propagation of photographs, texts, media objects, time we didn't spend together, time we spent with screens, apart. It leads to devastation. We can invite each other and ourselves to better ways of seeing, being, thinking, learning, behaving, working, loving. Then the tattered remains of origin, our frameworks, are lenient enough to allow to us. There's just enough play to get a tiny bit of nectar from the framework still. Maybe that phenomenon will not last long under present circumstances. So ideas that have been circulating in my reflective awareness. Backing away from representation into relationships. That perhaps we live in a moment when the sovereign of the interval in long time, the one who that interval, the progenitor of that interval, the sovereign who the interval inherits its character and qualities from, has changed in a way not dissimilar to how a month changes in a year, except in the span of epochs of like thousands of years. I think we've crossed a boundary like this, and something has fundamentally changed for human beings in the past few years, though it's been going for a long time. It's suddenly something has flipped over, and it's as if one of the qualities of time switched its polarity. These are my thoughts anyway. I'm trying to learn to understand. And I'm certainly willing to have it wrong. I'm just trying to learn to see in a new kind of darkness that's unfamiliar, that we don't have language about. And that, as usual, tries to appear in the guise of brightness. Now, I'm a fan of the good darkness, and I'm not big on the bad brightness. So it's not like darkness is bad and brightness is good, or right is correct and left is wrong. Wrong. Though in our language, that idea is embedded. The right way. It's a pretty weird idea because there's all different kinds of ways. A good way is an interesting idea. A beneficial way, that works. The right way, that has very limited reasonable scope of application. So what's wrong? I don't know. But I'm learning to see. With and for you, the living beings of Earth, and the history and the future of our world. I'm trying to learn to see. Hopefully we see together soon again.